Hey everyone, and welcome back to Showbiz Corner. Now today, we are tackling a question that has been debated for decades, sometimes seriously, sometimes emotionally, and sometimes by people who are way too deep into animatronic pizza restaurant lore at 2 in the morning. But it's a real question. Who actually did it better? Was it Showbiz Pizza Place, with the Rockafire explosion, the weird, chaotic, unbelievably advanced animatronic band that somehow felt more alive than it had any right to? Or was it Chuck E. Cheese, the brand that survived everything, adapted, rebranded, and is still standing today? Because on the surface, these two seem almost identical. Pizza, arcade games, birthday parties, animatronic shows. But once you actually dig into it, they couldn't be more different. Different origins, different philosophies, different goals, and ultimately, very different outcomes. So today, we are going to break it all down. Not just the nostalgia, not just the characters, but the actual experience, the technology, the business decisions, and the long-term impact. And by the end, we are going to answer the question, who was really better? Now to understand this, we have to go back to the beginning. Because even though people treat Showbiz and Chuck E. Cheese like direct competitors from day one, that's not really how it started. Chuck E. Cheese came first. It was created by Nolan Bushnell, the same guy behind Atari, and the idea was actually pretty genius for the time. Combine arcade games with food and entertainment, give families a place to hang out, and use animatronics to create a unique experience. And early on, it worked. But the animatronics themselves, while innovative, were still pretty basic. They had charm, sure, but they didn't exactly feel like full characters. They were more like robots performing songs. And that's where Showbiz comes in. Because Showbiz Pizza didn't just try to copy that idea. It tried to outdo it completely. When Robert Brock partnered with Aaron Fechter and creative engineering, they weren't just building another pizza place with a band. They were building something that, at the time, was honestly kind of insane. The Rockafire explosion wasn't just a group of animatronics. It was a fully realized cast. Each character had a personality. They interacted with each other. They had timing, humor, attitude. They didn't just play music, they performed. And that difference, right there, is what made Showbiz feel so special. If you walked into a Showbiz Pizza in the early 80s, it didn't feel like background entertainment. It felt like the main event. The lights, the stage, the way everything was set up, it was all designed around the show. Kids would literally stop what they were doing to watch. And honestly, adults did too. Because it was weirdly impressive. Now compare that to Chuck E. Cheese at the same time. Chuck E. Cheese was still fun, don't get me wrong. But the focus wasn't as strong on the show. It was more about the arcade. The animatronics were there, but they weren't the star of the experience in the same way. And that's where the first big difference shows up. Showbiz was about the performance. Chuck E. Cheese was about the overall environment. Now let's talk about the animatronics themselves. Because this is where Showbiz really pulls ahead. The Rockafire explosion was, for its time, ridiculously advanced. We are talking smoother movements, more expressive faces, better synchronization, and way more complex programming. But more importantly, they had personality. Billy Bob wasn't just the bear who plays guitar. He had a character. Rolf and Earl weren't just a ventriloquist act. They had this back and forth dynamic that actually felt like a comedy routine. Looney Bird was chaotic, sarcastic, unpredictable. Even the way they moved, it felt intentional. And that's because Aaron Fechter approached animatronics differently. He wasn't just trying to make robots move. He was trying to create performers. And that mindset made all the difference. Meanwhile, early Chuck E. Cheese animatronics were more limited. They worked, they were fun, but they didn't have that same level of depth. They didn't feel like a band. They felt like individual characters playing parts. So from a technical and creative standpoint, Showbiz clearly had the edge. But here's where things start to get more complicated. Because being better doesn't always mean winning. And this is where the business side comes in. The early 80s weren't exactly stable for this kind of industry. The video game crash hit hard. Arcades took a massive hit. And companies like Chuck E. Cheese struggled financially. At one point, they actually filed for bankruptcy. And this is where things take a turn that a lot of people don't expect. Showbiz, The company with the better product ended up buying Chuck E. Cheese. Think about that for a second. The underdog didn't just compete, it won. At least for a moment. But instead of doubling down on what made showbiz special, the company started making decisions based on cost, scalability, and long-term profit. And that led to something called concept unification, which, in simple terms, meant replacing the Rockefeller explosion with Chuck E. Cheese style shows. Now, from a business perspective, this made sense. Maintaining two different systems was expensive. The Rockefeller shows were complex. They required more upkeep, more programming, more resources. Chuck E. Cheese shows were simpler, easier to standardize, easier to roll out across locations. But from a fan perspective, this was the beginning of the end. And honestly, that's what makes this story so interesting. It's not just about pizza or animatronics. It's about how creative ideas survive, or don't, in the real world. But now I want to hear from you. Which side are you on? Were you a showbiz fan? Or did you discover all of this way later like I did? And more importantly, who do you think actually deserved to win? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. Because we've got a lot more deep dives, character breakdowns, and weird showbiz history coming up. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep the Rockefeller spirit alive.